In the city of Toronto, there were two barbershops, each with a single barber. The barbershop in the good part of town is clean and immaculate. The windows and floors are washed regularly, and the air is always fresh. The barber is very friendly, well-dressed, always smiling, his head well-groomed, and wearing shiny shoes. The barbershop in the bad part of town is in a state of mess. The entire barbershop is filthy, covered with dirt, and the air doesn't smell great. The barber is always cranky and looks like he hasn't taken a shower for a while. His hair is ragged, and there are always stains on his shirt. A man comes into town and hears of both barbershops, and which barbershop does he choose? The man decides to go to the dirty barbershop in the bad part of town. The clean-cut barber must have his hair cut by the dirty barber, and the dirty barber by the clean-cut barber. So it's clear that the dirty barber gives a nicer haircut. 4 golfers named Mr. Black, Mr. White, Mr. Brown and Mr. Blue were competing in a tournament. The caddy didn't know their names, so he asked them. One of them, Mr. Brown, told a lie. The first golfer said, "The second golfer is Mr. Black." The second golfer said, "I am not Mr. Blue." The third golfer said, "Mr. White?" That's the fourth golfer. And the fourth golfer remained silent. Which one of the golfers is Mr. Blue? If we assume the first golfer is Mr. Brown, then his statement must be lie, and other 3 must be telling the truth. That is, the second golfer must not be Mr. Black, and neither Mr. Blue, while the fourth golfer must be Mr. White. So, the only name left for the second golfer is Mr. Brown, which is already occupied by the first golfer as per our assumption. Hence, the first golfer can't be Mr. Brown. Let's suppose the second golfer himself is Mr. Brown, whose statement has to be lie. But in his statement he is telling the truth that he is not Mr. Blue. That's contradictory to the given fact that Mr. Brown told a lie. Hence, the second golfer must not be Mr. Brown. The only golfer left now for the name Mr. Brown is the third golfer, who must be lying in his statement. So, the fourth golfer must not be Mr. White. The second golfer must be Mr. Black, as pointed by the first golfer and assisted by true statement made by the second golfer. If the second golfer is Mr. Black, the third golfer is Mr. Brown, and the fourth golfer is not Mr. White, then the first golfer must be Mr. White, and the fourth golfer must be Mr. Blue. So the golfer who is named as Mr. Blue is the fourth golfer. There is a farmer who has 3 sons. Nearing his death, he asked his 3 sons to find 2 objects that can fill the room where he is in. The one who can deliver will be chosen as his heir. So the oldest son goes to the market to get flowers, while the middle son goes to get leaves. The youngest son goes to a shop and buys 2 things that he put in his pocket. The oldest son's flowers only fills half the room, the middle son's leaves fills 2/3 of the room, while the youngest fills the room with his 2 objects. What are the 2 objects that the youngest son used to fill the room? The youngest son used a match and a candle to fill the room. A woman had a fox, a goose, and a sack of corn. She came to a stream, which she had to cross in a tiny boat. She could only take one across at a time. She could not leave the fox alone with the goose, or the goose alone with the corn. How did she get them all safely over the stream? She took the goose over first and came back. Then, she took the fox across and brought the goose back. Next, she took the corn over. Finally, she came back alone and took the goose. A king has no daughters, no sons and no queen. He must decide who will inherit the throne after he dies. This wasn't an easy task. There were many subjects in the kingdom. Finally, He decides that he will give all of the children of the kingdom a single seed. Whichever child who will have the largest, most beautiful plant will earn the throne. Eventually, at the end of the contest, all of the children came back to the king's castle with their beautiful plants in hand. After he looks at all of the children's pots, he finally decides that the little girl with an empty pot will be the next queen. Why did he choose this little girl? After all, the other children presented some very beautiful plants. The king gave them all fake seeds, and the little girl was the only honest one who didn't switch seeds. A barber lives in Toronto. The barber shaves all men living in Toronto. But apparently, no man living in Toronto is allowed to shave himself. Who shaves the barber? No one. The barber of Toronto is a woman. A girl was at a carnival and went to a booth where a man said to the girl, "If I write your exact weight on this piece of paper, then you have to give me $60, but if I cannot, I will pay you $60. The girl looked around and saw no scale, so she agrees, thinking no matter what the carny writes, he'll just say he weighs more or less. In the end, the girl ended up paying the man $60. How did the man win the bet? The man did exactly as he said he would and wrote your exact weight on the paper. A man wanted to enter an exclusive club but did not know the password that was needed. He was by the door and listened. A club member knocked on the door and the doorman said, 12. The member replied, 6, and was let in. A second member came to the door and the doorman said, 6. The member replied, 3, and was let in. The man thought he had heard enough and walked up to the door. The doorman said 10, and the man replied 5, but he was not let in. What should have he said? Three. The doorman allows in those who answer with the number of letters in the word, the doorman says. We hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe.